Cool. So this lecture is being recorded, and this is a big lecture for you all. This is the lecture after which you are allowed to put full stack developer on your LinkedIn. Um, like, and actually, just as I made this reference on Tuesday, but if you still have the word aspiring on your profile on like LinkedIn or something like that, get rid of it. At this point, the people who are applying for jobs, depending, might know less than you. So just say full stack developer, software developer, Rails JavaScript developer. But get that word aspiring out of your profile. You can now start applying for jobs kind of after your LinkedIn is definitely worth it. Earnestly, like as a developer, LinkedIn is super valuable. People will be hitting you up all the time. It's like it's designed basically for developers. You end up in a situation where if you like Mark, hey, I'm looking for a job, especially like after you go through this program and you've connected with a bunch of other LinkedIn people, you like a bunch of people will like just reach out to you and ask for stuff, especially after you've gotten your first job and like you've proven your chops and you have something on your resume to be like, hey, I was a developer at this company for this year. Like you will start getting recruitments all the time. And even if that's not where you want to get your job, it's helpful to get some numbers from some recruiters so that you can use them on your own employer to increase your own salary. So as much as it's an incredibly goofy platform, it is totally worth it for developers. Your career service coach in career services will insist that you get a LinkedIn, so it's kind of not optional. Cool. But get aspiring out of your bio. You're now a developer. Like, if you need someone to tell you that, I know that I'm going to keep telling you that, especially like when you graduate, I'll give like a whole speech about how you're a developer. But regardless, you're no longer an aspiring developer. Cool. So here we are. We have our cats page again, right? And I did a couple of changes to it. I have these two little divs that eventually what I want to do is I want to make it so that you can tip the actors who played all of these cats for their great performance, right? So if you want to give Taylor Swift $10, you could. You can vanish Bomblerina to the barge in the Thames, which would serve as deleting Bomblerina from the Dom. And then we have this form. We're not going to get to all of these today. We will get to a couple of these today, hopefully. But this is the first step of several steps to make fetch happen with an API on your backend. Right now, the way that we are getting our cats is through the FastJSON API, just serving this JSON object as if it were an API, which is great for testing with small data sets, but it's completely useless if you want to host a server on the internet. So today this goes away. I'm going to kill localhost 3000/cats. But before we do, questions on how this is running now before I dive right in. Do you all see how this is working? We have a very similar cats.js as we did before with the other things of we have tips, we have delete buttons as well. But we're just fetching from a little npm package called JSON server that is hosting this JSON object as if it's a RESTful tool. The one thing that we're not rendering, I have this team name, right? And my eventual goal here is we're going to turn this into two models, a team and has many cats. And this isn't necessarily something that really makes sense within the domain of the Cats 2019 cinematic universe. But what I'm kind of imagining is that there's some people who supported Macavity at the Jellicle Ball. There's Jellicle Ball contestants who mostly get banished to a barge in the Thames and then eventually come back. They're just regular Jellicles. And then there's Grisabella, who's unaffiliated. Nobody wants her. And that becomes one of the arcs. So that this is the imaginary like world I'm trying to make happen so that I can have two models set up for this. Cool. So we are rendering out several cats, but now the server is going to go away. And we're going to refresh the page and we're going to get, hey, there's a connection refused here. And therefore we failed to fetch, and then nothing gets rendered. Is this unexpected for anyone? These errors make sense. Localhost 3000/cats isn't serving anything. We got a connection refused, and then we get a failed fetch error. We good here? Cool. So at this point, right, I'm going to CD out of this repo. And I'm going to talk to you a bit about what we're doing today. And what it means to be a full stack developer and what it means to have a backend. So right now, I need to create a server that will host cats and will process the cats against the database, right? Our eventual goal for the entire rest of this phase is we are going to have a JavaScript frontend whose job is to render our entire website for us. And to, without refreshing, without navigating to new pages, do whatever the user wants us to do. Meanwhile, in order to get that database functionality, to get a dynamic website that stores information from somebody else that does something like that, we're going to have a Rails backend that's job isn't to serve views, but is instead to serve JSON data and to process requests. So it's going to be the same kind of controller routes pattern, but instead we're going to be serving JSON data to the user. Is anyone like, hey, I have no idea what you're talking about right now? Awesome. So basically, the first thing I'm going to note, this is a very my favorite way to do this. I highly recommend that you do this for your project. I would recommend keeping your backend repo, the thing that has Rails in it, and your front end repo, the stuff that serves your JavaScript and stuff like that, as two separate repositories. There are ways to do it without doing that. That being said, the easiest way to deploy your app is to deploy them both as separate repositories. Because both Amazon Web Services, Heroku, those are the two I've played around with. But like a bunch of other servers will have automatic ways to try to host your app for you. So this is what I'm getting to, right? If it finds that Rails is the root directory of an app, if it like goes into a GitHub repo and it says like, oh, this looks like a Rails app, it will automatically figure out how to deploy it for you, which makes your life way easier, right? If you instead have like two folders inside the same repo, you're going to have to like do some sub-module processing. And that's going to be a pain in the ass. It's like something you can do. It's some configuration. It'll require some Googling. If you end up having one repo to do both your Rails backend and your front end, that's not too much of a crisis. But it's very, very common as actual developers to separate those into two different repos. That like you in like a production app you'd share under the same workspace or something like that. But having them as two different repos makes it really easy to deploy. You get to have different GitHub histories, and also it just as a broader strokes thing, it encourages you to think as if those two things are separate. If your GitHub commits had a bunch of changes on the front end and a bunch of changes on the back end together, it probably means that you're doing too many steps at once. So my advice just for your project to make it way easier to deploy, have two different repos, one for your back end, one for your front end. Cool. And that's just like part of that is just trust me, Heroku and Amazon Web Services will be happier with you. And you can like link to them in your README, very normal thing to do. You can customize it differently, but as a student, I would really recommend two different repos. So cool. We currently have a folder called Rails as an API, right? If I want to create a Rails app, what do I need to do right at this point?
Say
Rails
new.
Rails new. Nice. That was a test to see how much you all remembered. And you all passed. That was great. So cool. I'm going to call this Rails as an API backend. Then there's a couple of other things. First off, I would recommend if you're planning on deploying your apps, setting it to have an initial database as a PostgreSQL database. This only works if you have Postgres installed on your computer and if it's running. you will see that I have this little elephant right here that's saying that PostgreSQL 11 is running. I can click stop and then I could ruin my life forever. Or I can just I just have this going all the time. PostgreSQL works differently than SQLite in a bunch of different ways. But functionally, the big different thing for you all is that when you're deploying, Heroku will run a PostgreSQL app in production, and so will Amazon Web Services. They will not do that with SQLite. SQLite is mostly for development, whereas like if you want to run a production grade web server, you're going to be using Postgres or something similar. There are a bunch of other things you can learn about databases. Very quickly, you get past my level of knowledge. But PostgreSQL, great way to set up a database. I have this in the README, by the way. Oh, this is going to spoil something. I'll wait for that. But yeah, if like you can feel free to just keep using SQLite over the course of this phase, but if you're planning on eventually deploying something, especially next phase, you should get Postgres to work. If you don't have Postgres working, and you can't figure it out, I would go back to the phase 1 labs. Yes, I would go back to the phase 1 labs, and it will walk you through exactly how to install Postgres and stuff like that. It's an app, you have to install it. And Ryan, yes, you're then we can talk about it. That sounds less fun. This is mostly for deployment, so it's not like something that you have to do for your final project. So if you really need to study and like Postgres is taking up a lot of your time, ignore it. But then talk to me at some point and we can try to debug this, or ask a question will also help if they still exist. But I don't know. I haven't heard about them in a while. But then Ryan, you had a great question. If you haven't done -- database equals PostgreSQL, it is actually really straightforward to switch from a SQLite database to a PostgreSQL database in Rails. So straightforward that it feels almost silly. I would just Google a blog and it will walk you through that. Cool. So at this point, right, this would build out a whole Rails stack for me, including a bunch of views, including a bunch of other stuff, like all these stuff that I just typed. A lot of it's unnecessary when we're just building an API. In the dream world, what tag would you want to put to go ahead and generate just an API for us?
To put a flag API.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We're back in Rails, so things make sense again. And it'll do stuff for you. And it's just going to go ahead and set this up. We're going to bundle install. When you are running a Postgres database, oh, whoops, we need a CD in Rails as an API backend. I'm actually going really quickly. I'm going to open this all up in another window so that I can see all my phase 4 repos. Cool. And you'll now notice we have this new folder of Rails and API backend. We're familiar with how Rails just generates everything for us. And then I'm going to CD into Rails as an API backend. Cool. Bundle, install. And then the one big difference about using for like new developers in using Postgres, in order to set up our database, we have to run an extra step where we write Rails DB create. Cool. Oh, and then it's going to tell me that it already exists because I did a test version. Rails DB drop. Great. Rails DB create. Great. Cool. Now I don't have to worry about what I did before. So at this point, do you have any questions before we dive in at this point? Was there anything really weird about what we just did? We're back in Railsland. How's everyone feeling to be back in Railsland? Excited or like, cool, okay. We've got at least Ryan is raising the roof slightly. Does it feel like ancient history at this point? Cool. So right now, our first step, right, is we should go about actually translating this cats.json, turn this into an actual thing in our database that has two models, right? That's what I mentioned before. We want to have a cat model that has all of these things and is affiliated with a team. And then we want to have a team model that has a name. Anyone think they can walk me through how we can set this up in the database?
Do one more time what we're trying to,
We are eventually trying to create two models, one for cats, one for teams. And we want the cat to belong to a team. And we want the team to have a name, and we want the cat to have all these attributes.
Maybe it has many things.
Yeah, we definitely want to like have a has many belongs to relationship for sure. Right?
so we want to generate a scaffold.
I'm gonna do I think
Generate two
this
models, right?
sorry, say that again.
We need to generate two models.
I think I'm going to generate one model for team and one resource for cats because at this point I only imagine us fetching to cats. So yeah, Rails G model, right? That's the first thing. Let's create the team first. What do I write next?
Macava team.
Macava team. I'm just going. I don't want the whole attribute to be called Macava team. I think that would be great, but it would be get confusing really quickly. I'm just going to call it team. Is that okay? What attributes should
Oh,
this team
okay.
have?
I get you.
Yeah.
I get you.
Just gonna go ahead and give this a name. Then we can be like, no test framework if we want. Cool. This feeling familiar to everyone? Cool. If it's feeling familiar, how do we go about creating a cat model that has all four of these attributes and then also belongs to this team?
Rails generate model cat. Cat.
It's gonna be singular, but yeah. When we're
Yeah.
generating a controller, we're generating in plural, generating a model singular. But yeah, Rails. I'm gonna do resource, but yeah, spot on. Cool. What
Okay,
else?
yeah. Name, actor, description, image, and then belongs to. Would it be belongs to colon? What do we call it? Team.
Spot on. Except I think I'm right here, right? Team belongs to. Am I getting that wrong?
I
that's right.
can't remember. It's one way or the other.
I think the team can.
Is that the same as references?
Yes, it's exactly the same as references. They're aliases for each other. You can take a look at the. Cool, that works. I'm actually going to do that one more time because I don't want the test framework. Great. Awesome. So now we have this belongs to, right? We can take a look at our models, right? We have a cat belongs to a team. Team has many cats. Yeah. I can do Rails DB migrate. Cool. How do we feel about all that? What was the weirdest part?
Why did you create a resource and not a model for cat?
Because eventually I want to serve some stuff, right? I want to have like controllers. I want them to have actions. I want to like start up and like be able to already have some stuff in my config file. But like you're right. There's very especially now that we don't have the views, right? There's very little difference, right? Like we could have definitely done most of that on our own. But I like to have this already set up. A couple of other things, since we're going to be serving cats for sure. We might not end up serving team. Yeah. So at this point, we now want to translate this cat's JSON object into Rails. Yeah. If we want to make these go into our database, right? Where should we probably put them?
I think seed file.
I think that would be a very good idea. Cool, let's copy this, right? Let's go over to our Rails DB seeds. I'm just gonna start by doing, oops, cats equals boop boop. Cool. This is almost what we want. First off, we're now in Ruby land. So you notice that this is camel case right now. Yeah. We don't camel case in Ruby. Team name underscores. We're back in Ruby. And just because we're now working in two different language, I don't expect that rule to go away. I want you to be lower camel casing on the front end and underscoring in the back end. Yeah, that's gonna feel weird. Cool. So now we have this array of cats, right? How do I go ahead and turn these into cat objects in my database? What do I need to write in my seed file? Or barring what we need to write, like what do I need to do?
Would it be cat.create?
Yeah, we probably need to call cat.create on all of these, right? So yeah, and that seems like exactly the way to do it, right? Ryan saying cats.each, and then this is the Ruby way to do things, right? Cat.create cats. I'm actually gonna be like even more Ruby, so that you all remember this. It's not for each, it's not a for loop. We're back in Ruby. Each do, then we do this block. Cool. Y'all see that? We're gonna run into one error here. Does anyone know what it's gonna be? Cool. No worries. I'll call this Rails DB seed. We get unknown attribute team name for cat. How do we go about solving this? Anyone have an idea? This is the most advanced Ruby question I'm going to give you here. Just to remind you that we still have to solve Ruby Rails problems here. It's saying we don't have an attribute team name for cat. I can't just pass in team name into cat without doing something first. Any ideas?
Migrating.
We could migrate it, right? But if we gave it a string of team name, right? Our schema, right, is kind of intentionally set up to not have the cat have a team name, right? We want that to be the let's see if we can. I'm just gonna pull up the schema, right? We want the team name to be the job of the team model. So I don't want to add like a team name right here because we've got a team ID right here. Give it an alias. Yeah, we could. So in terms of what our next step is, right? Currently, it knows how to save a name, an actor, an image, and a description because it inherited that from Active Record because of our database. It does not currently know how to save a team name. But we can teach it how to. Does this feel familiar to anyone? Can anyone tell me what this is?
The writer method.
It's a writer or a custom setter method. That's exactly right. We're saying, hey, this
Cats,
is how
question mark,
cats.
question mark, and then colon.
So I think you're thinking of a
Like
ternary operator right here. I don't think we necessarily need that right yet. We can go ahead, now that we have this team name, right? our goal is to take this name and do something with it. But what we're doing right here is we have the setter method that says if you're given a team name, right? If we create with a team name or we try to call this dot team name equals on something, on a cat, it's going to go ahead and run what's in here, passing whatever we call it equal to in this name or as name. That was none of those words made sense together. Let me try that again. If I now call cat like cat.team name equals cheese on a cat instance, it will run whatever's in this method, right? So if I wanted to be like puts name and that's it, right? Let's run Rails DB seed. You will notice now it'll print out all of those names to the DOM because we're saying, hey, if you call team name equal to name, just print out those names, or not to the DOM, to the console. And then if we call like Rails C and we go into our cats, right? Cat.first, we end up with nil, right? What does everyone think happened here?
Oh. Hmm.
Rather than just guessing, let's put a buy bug right here. Is it Rails DB seed? Cool. I'm just going to, ooh, there we go. That's interesting. Cats. Exit. Did you just get mad at me to say like, hey, you can't put a buy bug here? Just gonna put a 0 right here, see if that fixes anything. Yeah, weirdly that does. Cats, we now have it. This is a weird bug. Sometimes if you put buy bug as the last line, you need to put like another line afterwards so it doesn't break. Just like as a heads up. We have cats, right? I can call cats dot first, right? We can set this equal to cat. Yeah. So we get some information about Taylor Swift's character and cats. If I were to call cat dot, like if I were to call cat equals cat dot create cat, pass this or like new cat. We're gonna run this. Let me get this idea of nil, right? And we can now see like, hey, why weren't you saved into the database? It says team must exist, right? It belongs to, so the team's going to exist. This is a long form way to show you that we're still going to be debugging in Rails with the same tools. Buy bug, check your params, call errors on the object you have saved. Cool. That doesn't go away. Any questions about how I did this? I did this very quickly. Usually like this is something that we'd spend 8 weeks teaching, right? What's the weirdest part of this? Thumbs up, thumbs sideways, thumbs down. Sideways, cool. I think everyone's waiting to see how we solve this error, which I'm going to go ahead and do. So currently, our cat model, the setter method, is just going to print it out to the console. It's not going to do anything with it. Arguably, what I want it to do is use that to either find a team name if that team already exists, or create it. And we can go ahead and say self.team equals team.find or create by name. What we're doing right here is when we initialize a cat, right? And we pass a team name into that like hash that we're initializing with, it's going to call this method. And what it's going to do with this method is it's going to set the self.team equal to a team that we're either finding or creating by the name. We're going to check to see if it exists in the database, and if not, we're going to create it. Make sense? Cool. now if I do Rails DB seed, or let's do Rails DB reset first. Cool. Rails. First off, I forget whether. Cool. And we now have everything. So I called Rails DB reset, which is going to dump my database, restart my database, run my migrations, then seed for me. And so now we have cat.aw, indu.pluck to find the names, right? We've got team.aw.pluck name. Maybe like team.first.cats. You can see all the cats associated with Macava team. Cool. We're back in Rails land. How's everyone feeling? Cool. We now have 7 cats. Cool. So our next goal is going to be to render these cats, right? Let's go ahead. Let's spin up the server. Exit Rails S. Localhost 3000/cats. Now we get this error that we're all familiar with. Look, we're back in Ruby land. We're back in Rails land. Who knows how we solve this error?
Like
Define
an
Yep.
index action, the cat's control.
That's exactly right. Nice. Do you all still remember Rails? Def index end at cats equals cat.aw. Refresh this page. It's getting mad at me because it says, hey, there's no content here, right? The one big thing, right? We no longer automatically render a view because we don't have a view, right? Said, has anyone read ahead, or does anyone want to just guess what I have to write here to make this work?
Render JSON.
Man. Loop. Look at this bad boy. We now get a list of cats. Yeah? One thing, if you don't have it already, JSON Viewer is a great Chrome extension to make this readable, right? If you usually see this as one long string, install this little tool right here. But you're noticing we go to localhost 3000/cats and it is printing out a list of cats for us. Cool. This is very, very similar. I would say almost identical to the stuff we had before, right? The ones just, we probably want to change this. We want to like have an actual team name. We want to get rid of this created and updated it, right? But how are we feeling? Does this feel good? Cool. If I refresh my page, you will see I get a new error. You should have expected this to work, right? Like we went to localhost 3000/cats and it gave us a list of cats. Yeah. But instead, when we go here, this breaks. Still, it says, hey, from access to fetch from origin, blah, 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 has been blocked by a CORS policy, this thing, right? Has anyone seen this before? Has anyone worked ahead? We're about to get into one of the more technical bits of Rails, right? Like this is just a couple of steps. What this is, what CORS is cross-origin resource sharing. I really hope that I don't mess that up. But basically, the gimmick behind CORS, it's a security feature that most backends have, and a lot of backends have. The goal there is to make it so that by default, not just anyone can hit your app with JavaScript, because JavaScript is notoriously sketchy. Like anyone can run JavaScript on your app. If I've slipped an ad into your app, into your browser, on your page that lets me run JavaScript, it gives me access to a bunch of stuff, right? And if you're a company like Bank of America, you might not want to risk that your cookies get into somebody else's hands that then can send a fetch request to your backend, right? You might want to like have some rules being like, hey, I only want to accept fetch requests from my website and from sites like and from like these listed sites, right? So that's a security issue. It only works with it only blocks JavaScript. So if you're ever in like a situation where you run into a CORS error with an API, chances are like there's actually a bunch of different CORS errors, and I've heard that Google Chrome just updated its list of CORS errors, so now it's like much easier to interpret what the issue is. Chances are, if you get a CORS error, I'm about to show you the one big solution to like your own app. There will be other situations where you get a CORS error that's not really a CORS error, but actually a syntax error. In that case, I would double check your syntax. A third situation is you might have run into an API that legitimately doesn't allow you to fetch from JavaScript. That's a really normal thing. Instead, those APIs will usually still absolutely allow you to fetch from a Rails server or even a browser. Like a browser that has like some different stuff. Usually like a Rails server or some sort of other server will do that fetch for you. So if you ever run into an API that will not accept fetches from the front end, you might have to then pivot to make a request to your Rails backend that then makes a request to a server. That's just a heads up for when you're working with an API. And that's a totally normal thing to do. There are still ways to get around it. There are some like pretty snooty, sketchy servers that will allow you to be like, hey, you want to fetch something from JavaScript? Why don't you use my proxy, which will make that network request for you, just being a server? It's harder than it sounds, though. So if you're trying to hack your way around that, my advice is to create something with a Rails app in the backend. For your own personal Rails app, you get to decide whether somebody can fetch to your backend or not from JavaScript. Cool? I'm about to show you how to do that. But before I do, I just want to make sure everyone's really familiar with what this error is. How are we feeling? What CORS is it's a policy, it's a security policy that says, hey, I'm not going to by default allow you to just fetch to my app from JavaScript because JavaScript is sketchy and full of terrors. Cool. So what we do when we're setting up our Rails app, first off, you will find in your gem file when you initialize an API. And first off, this is why it's another reason why it's important to initialize this as an API. If you don't initialize your Rails app as an API, you can still serve JSON. By default, like how you set up CORS is going to be very slightly different. You'll be able to find in the README. This just won't track with what you'll have to do. Like just Google on the internet, like how to make a Rails server accept CORS from blah, 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 whatever. I don't know. Like that's a terrible Google suggestion. But when you set it up as an API, I know that this appears right here. Use Rack CORS for handling cross-origin resource sharing. Is that what I said earlier? I think I got that right. Making cross-origin AJAX possible. We now should know what all of these terms mean. Rack, what Rails is built on, what Sinatra was built on, what every Ruby network request thing is built on, basically. For handling cross-origin from JavaScript, from like your browser to some other API, making cross-origin asynchronous JavaScript and XML HTTP requests possible. That's what we're reading right here. Cool. Go ahead, comment this in. Going to kill my server, bundle, install. And then the last thing I have to do is in your config/initializers, you're going to find this file called cors.rb. In here, you get, this is where you specify how you want to accept requests from your websites. I'm going to comment this all in as it suggests. And you'll notice there's a little link right here. And then there's one thing I have to change. If you're not if you're not wise in the ways of CORS, I still want you to guess what I have to change here.
Change origins.
I have to change what? Sorry, your mic is a little quiet.
Origins.
Origins, yeah. Example.com is not the website we're going to use, right? we're going to be fetching from localhost 3000 development and probably something else for production. I'm flagging this right now because I have had so many students be like, I keep getting course issue. I can't figure out what's wrong. I did all the steps as instructed. And then we go over here and they're like, I'm like, is your website example.com? And then they go, no. And then I go like, so you probably want to change that. I'm usually much nicer. But if you find this a problem, I would double check that it's not originsexample.com. Right now, while we're in development, you can change this to say, hey, allow a fetch from any origin. When you're pushing to production, I would urge you to make this the production URL. Cool. So like your actual front end apps URL. We all cool with this? Cool. Here, I am now finally going to run Rails S again. And you do need to restart your server when you change an initializer. Yeah. And now if I refresh the page, we get our cats again. Cool. How are we feeling? So what we're doing right here is we're serving. So for your JavaScript project, no. Because you're not really creating a server with you're probably going to be hosting somewhere. So yeah, I guess in a way that's a server, but it's usually like a GitHub is like running a server for you that just serves index.html, right? But really what you're doing is you're serving a bunch of files like an index.html that has a file structure with a few scripts attached, right? It's really just like a bucket for files on your front end. And then your back end is an actual like server that is actively paying attention and listening for requests. And then in React, it's going to get a little bit more complicated because there's like a compiler for you and a couple of other things. But yeah, you're running two different things at the same time. In React, you're legitimately going to be probably running your server on localhost 3000 and your website on localhost 3001. Cool. So here we are now allowing this. And I mentioned our next goal is probably to like incorporate this Teams thing. We don't have it like our actual team here, right? And if you go to our like localhost 3000, you'll notice I have this team ID, but I don't actually have the team's name. And there's some other stuff I don't necessarily want to serve. So at this point, I'm going to introduce you to a technology called serializers. Excuse me. So there are a bunch of serializers for Rails. I think your labs ask you to use FastJSON. I love Active Model Serializer, probably because it's the first one. At this point, I'm going to start switching up tech sometimes from the labs because I'm like, hey, this seems like something that you'd be able to read on your own. And I want to bully you into doing some documentation, digging up, so that when someone asks you like, hey, what's a situation where you've learned about something on your own, you can like start having things to answer. And also that's partially just my justification for me enjoying Active Model Serializer a little bit more. So I'll probably do some sort of lab where I do the FastJSON API. It's basically the same, but they all basically behave the same way. And what they are going to do, what all serializers do, is they develop rules for how we serve our JSON. Cool. So first off, I'm going to add this gem to my database. Cool. And then we'll just into my gem file right here. Boop, boop. So you'll notice like Rails even has a suggested serializer. I think it used to be Active Model Serializer. I don't know if anyone uses this. I'm curious about why. I've never like talked to somebody who likes JBuilder. But both of these will work. That might just be the people who I spend my time around with, which are Flatiron School students and teachers. But here we are. We now have this installed. And I'm going to dig into this documentation. So basically, let's see, getting started. There we go. says, hey, if you want to create a serializer, you can generate one like this. I'm just gonna go copy this. Rails G, whoops, no, this is wrong. I wasn't paying attention. Rails G resource, we know what that does. If we want to create a serializer. So first off, resource will generate a serializer for you. That's the first thing it's mentioning, right? So now if I've set this up and I generate a new resource, it's going to create a serializer for us. If I want to create a serializer of our own, Rails G serializer cat. Yeah. Documentation. Cool. And now this currently by default says attributes ID. When I refresh the page, what do you think I should see? Wait, first off, let me check that Rails is running. Yeah, Nando, you killed it. ID 1, ID 2, ID 3. So obviously not that helpful right now. But how do you think I get a cat's name in here? Yeah. We can go ahead and take a look at our schema. Actor, image, description. Cool. Now we have all of our information and just all of our information. This works, right? Have I lost people here? This is what a serializer will do for you. By default, now calling render JSON cats will like print out a bunch of cats. There's also a way to explicitly decide which serializer you want to use. So if in a case where you want to like have your cat index have different information than your cat show, which is super normal. Like imagining that if you're like writing a big website, you obviously don't want to serve all of your information on an index page when you have a lot of much more information on your show page, right? Like if we imagine my like restaurant app from last time, I like pretty much probably just want to have like a name, an image, and then like it's only when you click in that I want to like really serve like here's the location data, here's the associated stuff, here's all the other crazy stuff. When you get to that, the documentation will be your friend. But for now, and I'll probably like end up playing around with a couple of other things and showing you how to invoke them rather than just forcing you to do the documentation for all of it. But for now, assuming the one thing that I still don't have is I don't have a team name, right? Anyone have an idea for how I would get a team name? Just taking guesses. Yeah, if we
Oh,
do
the team
team,
name model thing,
yeah.
team name model attribute, your model
So you
function
did
we did.
Oh, so you're saying something like this, right? Oops, wrong thing. Because Nico, I think you're actually spot on here in terms of one solve right here. I'm going to do def team name reader method. Team.name or self.team.name. Remember, in Ruby, it's always going to try to call self by default, so you don't actually need it. But we can be explicit if we want to, right? So I have a couple of different things here. And I will tell you that multiple of these answers were correct. So starting with Ryan's suggestion that we just add team right here, this will go ahead and nest all of the objects for team right here. If I want it to be like real, if I want to be even more explicit, right? I could be like Rails G serializer team. Oops. I would CD into my Rails as an API backend. I could do Rails G serializer team. And then here, I can go ahead and do, hey, ID and name. Oops. Did I do something wrong? Oh, right. So then the one difference from what you're trying to do here, if I want to like make these serializers actually talk to each other, right? I can do actually belongs to team refresh the page. Now it will call on the team serializer for that team. Cool. And then we have this nested team object, right? Which can give us the team name. The other idea though, right? Like imagining though that I don't want to like go into my team and get a team name, right? Another thing I can do, right? ID, name, actor, image, and descriptions. The way it's actually getting these is using these keys to actually call those methods on the cat, which is when Nico's suggestion actually becomes really, really valuable, right? I create a reader method here called team name. Now, if I just want to, I can just go call it right here. Cool. And then team. And if we refresh our page, we get the team name, right? You can also do whatever you want here. I could be like Death, Batman, cheese. And then I can just be like, hey, also serve this up. And it'll go ahead and helpfully apply Batman cheese in here. You can also, I think, like do like self.object.team name. I think this will work. And it'll like go ahead and you can like use this to call things from your serializer if you don't want to make them into actual model methods. It's really versatile. If you, by default, right? If I had belongs to team, yeah, so Fernando, that's exactly your goal for phase 3, right? You're going to end up building a Rails app and a JavaScript front end. Just be careful never to say Java again when you're talking about JavaScript. And because people will throw rocks at you. Like earnestly, if you go into a meetup, yeah. I know what you meant. I just I'm warning you so that you don't get thrown out of the meetup. Cool. All right. So here we can now fix this, right? Yeah, kind of it basically decides what you want to serve as JSON. It just says like, hey, when you're going from this object in my database to something you're trying to serve as JSON, do this, print this instead. And it provides a bunch of rules for that. Yeah.
Can you apply the only and except like stuff here within your serialized?
I'm not sure.
Like if you didn't want your updated at, for instance, or something like that, you know, you don't have that, but something you didn't want.
Let's see. I don't think you can here directly. Instead,
Okay,
your goal
good to
is to, yeah. Instead, your goal is to use these bad boys talking to each other. One heads up, if you end up playing with this a bunch, you'll find that you might want to be like, hey, I want to nest all my teams, and then I also want to nest under those teams other things. I would be careful with that. There are rules for allowing you to recursively call serializers within other serializers. Like you can go ahead and be like, and then go one layer deeper than that, and then grab that. You have to like override some default settings to do so, because otherwise you might end up in a situation where you have like a belongs to team, and a team has many cats. And fortunately, this won't error out because it knows what you're trying to do here. So it won't try to serialize the team, the cats inside the team, and then serialize the team inside the cats, and then get an infinite loop. You can set it to not to like continue to nest, right? But in that case, you have to be very careful about infinite loops. Getting very into the serializer here, probably too far into it. The last thing I'm going to do really quickly, you'll notice now we're in Ruby land, right? Or we're going back into JavaScript land. I would love for this not to be underscored, right? And now I can code that directly, right? I can make my writer method like do this differently, right? But that being said, that's kind of not best practice. Instead, ActML serializers has this key transforms feature, which is going to actually solve this problem for us. We just got to go into some sort of an initialization place, and you can like actually transform your stuff however you want to. So I'm going to go into some random initializer. This case, I hope that we have an initializer for cool. I'm going to create a new initializer called like serializer.rb. Yeah. And here I'm just going to pass in this. And we can go reset our server. And every initializer, every Ruby file initializer in your Ruby file will be run when or everything in your Ruby file for under config initializers will be run when the app starts. So this is just some Ruby code that says, hey, find the model behind the scenes that's probably given to us by that gem, active model serializers, go into its config object and change its key transform to camel lower. Go ahead, run spring stop just in case it's initialized for us. But now if I do like Rails S, we can now go back and you'll notice team name now looks like this. Cool. Helpful little tool. Whichever serializer you use will probably have the exact same tool called a key transform.
We can just put that transform tool in our initializer, or just put it
Yeah.
in a serializer.rb.
Yeah, you can put this in any initializer you want. I would recommend throwing it in something that makes sense, right? So that other developers can find what you're doing. And now at this point, I'm terrible. Cool. All right. So at this point, we can now go back to continuing to work on stuff. Or we can go, whoops, run our Rails S. And we can here, now we can add a team name object. We can be like, P team cat.team name. Yeah. We refresh this. Now we have team, Macava team, Macava team. Idris Elba, really so much versatility. About to play Knuckles in the next Sonic movie. And then we've got like Jellicle Ball contestant, Jellicle, unaffiliated. This makes sense. Our CSS is a little screwed up now because now our blocks are a little bit big. But that's something to solve for another time. And so at this point, do you have any questions before we move forward on how we did all of this? This is a lot. We now just went to like serve something from our back end to the front end for the first time.
Yeah, so we definitely have to use Postgres SQL, right? And then
No.
also, okay, but you're highly recommending.
I'm
both
recommending if you're
serializer
planning on
and-
deploying an app. So if you're planning on serving it so that you can like put it on your resume, definitely use Postgres. If you're playing around, use SQLite. Cool.
and serializer, like it's highly recommended.
A serializer, I really like using serializers. There are very simple Rails apps where you might just want to be like, hey, just render this JSON and then only and accept, right? That is totally welcome too. I want to introduce you to serializers right now because it's just a really useful tool. Like, for example, we couldn't have with only and accepts just made this like team name happen right here. Or if we did, I don't know, except like, I don't know if that would work straight up. Serializers are just a really,
Gotcha.
really useful tool
Gotcha.
that you're welcome to use. Cool. So at this point, everyone wave to, never mind. At this point, we should add one of these features. I suggest we make this delete feature work. Sound good? So I'm going to go to cats.js, and here we currently have this delete button And we have access to this div. And we're just using closures to render all of this. So this is going to be a pretty kind solve. Does anyone know how we can make this delete button work to just delete Taylor Swift from the front end? Anyone think they can walk me through how to make it so that this delete button will delete Taylor Swift, CGI Taylor Swift from the front end when clicked? Or ideally make any of them delete from when their button is clicked.
Each of them are in a div or something, right? So then just.
Yeah.
Set an event listener and
Cool. I'm gonna, rather than class hidden, I'm definitely gonna do I'm gonna remove it. So what Kimberly said, definitely, we're going to use the remove feature to delete it from the front end. The hidden works, but it's a little bit messy. And ultimately our goal is to destroy it. But setting an event listener, how do we set an event listener to delete this?
Delete button dot add event listener. Quote, click. Anonymous function. And then crap, you got target Taylor Swift somehow.
Yeah, we could use like e.target and go to the parent, right? Or also in this closure, is there any sort of element that we already have access to that we might be able to use?
The cats list.
That'll give us the
probably.
whole list of cats, right? I'm actually going to show you the HTML structure. We've got the cats list, and then we've got a div with a class of cat card. And this is probably going to be what we want to remove.
Okay. Could you try? See, I usually go to debugger. I usually like put E in there and then I go into debugger and I just like find out what stuff I have to find like with E to
Cool.
target what I want.
Go ahead, click this. Not our debugger. You can be like E.target, right? And we could probably be like E.target.parent elements. Or you get the cat card. If rather than using parent element, if you're going to go this way, right? I would recommend using E.target.closest and then selecting it via CSS selector. And the reason for this is that if you end up nesting something one layer deeper, you don't end up breaking your whole code. Cool. Closest is the opposite of query selector, so it goes up the DOM tree rather than down. Searching for the nearest match. That being said, in this case, we are using E, right? And we can write this. We can be like, hey, this works. And we'll continue. We'll refresh the page. This totally works. So before I tell you how to change this, right? Totally fair. What I'm going to be trying to level you up all it's doing is thinking about what data we have access to and how our design patterns can help us here, right? What if I told you we didn't need E here because we're using the closure method? Anyone see it? So this render cat function for each cat is rendering this cat, and all of this stuff is still within scope inside of my event listener while I'm writing this, including this div right here that we created and then added the cat card to, right? So I legitimately, as long as I'm using closure, I can call div.remove. Boom. Yeah. So this is one of those like ultimately Morpheus's goal in the Matrix isn't teaching you how to dodge a bullet. It's teaching you how you won't have to. And this is that solve right here. Remember that if we keep it in scope, we won't have to do some crazy stuff to eat our target. But really good answer. First off, like being able to be like, hey, do this, and like going into the debugger, great solve if you can't think of this. You think of the closure design pattern. Remember, hey, this is probably in scope, and if it's not in scope, I can probably redesign my pattern a little bit to make it in scope. Cool. So now we have this remove, and this will remove it from the front end, right? Does anyone remember? Because now we're going to have to go ahead and remove it from the back end. Does anyone remember the restful route if we wanted to remove, say, Bomballerina, who has an ID of 1 from the back end? So I'm looking for the restful route. Delete. Yeah, that's going to be the HTTP verb. And to what URL? Yeah, cat/ID, right? If we go over here, you can be like localhost 3000/rails/info/routes. And you will see here, first off, you'll see some things missing. We don't have a cats hash new or a cats hash edit. Why don't we have a new or an edit?
Because we don't have views.
That's exactly right. New and edit's job are just to show views for forms. Since we don't have that anymore, we can get rid of view, new and edit, so it won't generate it for you in an API context. Cool. Now, when we're deleting, though, we're going to cats and then that cat's ID, and it will send us the cats destroy action. Cool. So our goal, no, so first get the cat ID, which we can do, right? Anyone want to console log the ID for this cat? What do I want to put in here?
Cat.id.
That's exactly right. 1, 2, right? So now our next goal, right, is we need to make a request to our backend to delete something, right? And we know that what we want to make is a delete request to local host 3000 /cats/ cat.id. Yeah. That's our goal for this fetch. Yeah. So remember, our fetch's job is just to do a network request. First off, really quickly, a little refactor that basically everyone does because it's very helpful. Eventually, you're going to be going from development mode to production mode and back, right? And for that, having localhost 3000 hard coded isn't going to work because you're going to be like working in development mode and you're going to be using localhost 3000, but then you're going to try to test it in production and you're not going to want to switch every single localhost 3000 to like bestcatsfansite.herokuapp.com, right? So instead, what a lot of developers do first, this is the first step, doing this. And then you can go ahead and do like API plus cats, or you can do I'm going to show you a couple of other patterns to clean up your fetches and to like make your fetches more clean as we go through this this course, right? But saying this equal to a variable, then doing /cats here, this is going to make your code more modular when it comes time to deploy. So very common refactor for developers and something I highly recommend to you just get into the practice of doing now. Cool. Store your API in one place because it's something you're likely to have to change very often. So now, in order to make a fetch to localhost 3000/cats/ID, first things first, we go to everyone's best friend using fetch MDN, the best webpage on the internet. That includes my own. That includes 2003 Neopets, 1996 Space Jam, and Newgrounds during its heyday. This is the best website on the internet. So right now we have this normal fetch, but if we scroll down, you'll see that they have a bunch of different suggestions, right? But if you want to get the one that just tells you exactly every single different kind of thing you can do, this is currently using async await syntax, which is a little bit messy, right? But this will tell you, this will give you the first portion of the fetch, right? I'm just going to copy this one out. Eventually, like the two that you'll probably use most are this one, this like initial fetch that just tells you like how to make a GET request, and this one right here, which will tell you how to upload. But you'll eventually like figure out how to do delete actions because it's basically this minus these. So I'm actually going to go ahead and do that real quick. I'm going to copy this. Oops. Come on, buddy. If you're like, hey, this looks hideous, you are probably right. I will eventually teach you how to get fetches out of your code and into someplace cleaner, using something called the adapter pattern. For now, this will go ahead and just look ugly. Cool. But here, I'm gonna clean up some of this. What do we think we need to change to make this a delete request to localhost 3000/cats, then our cat's ID?
Fetch API and change method to delete.
Yes, we want API. We're getting a /cats. Anything else we want to add here?
Cat ID, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Instead of using this method post, we're just going to do delete. This next one, this headers, this is for telling it how to parse the JSON data we're sending over. Do we need JSON data when we're sending over a delete request? Where's our ID coming from in our params? Like, what part of this is sending over the ID? Yeah, the URL right here. Spot on. Y'all know it. So cool. Let's just do this right here. Fetch method delete to this route, then do this, then do this. Cool. Let's try this out. Anyone expect this to work? Yeah, it won't work yet, right? We haven't built this out. It says 404 not found. And then it actually like yields abstract controller action not found. The action destroy cannot be found for cats controller. Very helpful errors. We're in Rails. We're playing with Rails. Rails wants to tell us what's wrong, unlike JavaScript. What's wrong is that the action destroy can't be found for the cats controller. We do have a route, but we don't have our actual controller action. I go ahead, def destroy. Anyone know what we should put here?
Cats.destroy.
And then what? Cat.destroy. This is a little bit alarming, right? If we do cat.destroy, we're calling destroy on the class.
You need to find by ID maybe.
Yep. Be like cat equals. Oh, I'm being a little goofy. First off, we don't need instance variables anymore. You don't need to use them in your controller when you're rendering stuff as JSON. We're not passing them down to a view. Cool. But this right here, we'll do some of the work. We can go test this out. And this works, except I get this error right here. If I went ahead right here, I went back to my cats.js, and I were to instead go like, hey, then div.remove. Yeah. This is actually gonna fail out on me. Anyone want to know what? Anyone take a guess why this fails out on me?
You
Yeah,
have to do
it's-
the two J. Sorry.
But Nico, you're about to hit this spot on the same thing. Omar's right. We sent back our network request, right? Our network request. We make this fetch to delete, right? We say, hey, method this, delete, no content, right? 204 no content means like, hey, you did it. I'm not saying anything that back because I don't need to, because this is green. It's a 200 error, still good. You can totally code it your app to work like that. The issue is I'm calling response.json something that doesn't have any JSON. We can solve this problem by doing like this probably. I bet this will work. Sorry, Skimble Shanks. And now this works. Alternatively, we can begin to start doing some sort of error handling, where you can go to our controller and we can be like, render JSON message. You did it. You vanished. A cat to the Thames. I don't want to feel like how to like store the cat's name before I delete it. But you probably have to do like name. Before we go ahead and destroy that cat, and then we can be like, oop. Let's just call it name to the Thames. Cool. Now, if we go ahead, we will see that when we delete something, we can now take a look at our network tab. Our fetch will have sent back a message saying, you did it. You vanished Mr. Mistopheles to the Thames, right? And I'm not going to consistently pronounce Thames right during the course of this lecture for all you British people, mostly to frustrate you. But everyone see how this works? We can just go ahead and we can be like, hey, this, we can go do like render JSON, cool. And start to, in our controller, think about how we can error handle this if this doesn't work. That's going to be for next lecture, for like another lecture. But there's a lot of stuff we can do with this. So, but we're finding a cat, we're destroying it, and then we're just being like, hey, great job. If you ever see that, hey, I can't part, if you ever, it would be more reusable, but like if this, like in this case, right? If I delete something, right? I kind of want it to actually persist, right? That's the point of this app. You don't have to like allow anything to be deleted on your website. Like there's certain things that you don't want to delete on your website. In this case, I'm adding a feature that's for adding and removing cats. So this is, we currently have covered read and delete of our create, read, update, delete right now. I am going to like, we can always delete all these cats again, and then we can right here do Rails DB seed and then get back. I'm going to change this to be like a cat to the Thames. Rails S. It's going to go ahead and work. Yeah. If like when we like our next step is going to be, this is going to be an update method, right? This is going to be a create method. And then when we're done with that, we're going to have all of CRUD done here. But currently, this fetch right here is saying, hey, fetch to this API with this endpoint, right? We can go into our cats controller and we can put like a little bybug right here. I'm gonna put it right here. And if we try this again, this is going to hit my bybug, right? And here I can see that params has an ID of 8, right? So this is how it's working, right? This ID is coming from our, let's close everything out here. I want this. Whoop, whoop. Whoop. Our ID is coming from this portion of the URL, right? Because if we go to our routes, anything passed in here is going to be passed in as a key. You can see that by the colon ID. And we're sending this over. And then only when we get a response are we running div.remove, right? Only when we get a response that we expect, we're calling div.removed. You actually can, in the case of deleting, you could do like this instead of this. This method right here is called optimistic rendering. This right here is called pessimistic rendering. Can someone tell me what the difference is and why we probably call it that?
One create and one destroys.
Not quite. They're both, this removes it from the front end. This removes it from the back end. I'm looking for the difference between this and this.
One displays in, well, the one on the right is gonna display like in the screen, right? Gonna say you did it, you banished, and the other one is not. It's just gonna delete it.
Sure. But in this case, right, like this code right here is doing exactly the same thing, right? The one difference is if we write it up here and then I make a mistake right here, right? Oops. Continue on the bad book. If I made a mistake right here, this is still going to delete and my users are going to think they did something right. But then when we refresh the page, it's going to be back. When we do optimistic rendering, what we're saying is, hey, go ahead and remove this and then send a fetch request to the backend to make sure it's removed from the backend. When we go here, when we do it this way, this will only remove it if it successfully comes back and we don't get an error. And this is like, this what right here is how we're going to do it in the future when we want to make sure that the user can see that something worked. And when it matters to the user. An example when you would want to use optimistic rendering, way back in the before times, when I rode the subway often to work, I would be on my phone and I would be browsing Twitter on the subway, right? And that would be underground. And so like I would be browsing the same 50 tweets because I'm addicted to Twitter. And occasionally I would do that thing where you like find something that makes you kind of quietly chuckle on social media and you like hit the like button, you know, and it'll like turn that hard into red, right? We're all familiar with this from social media. Like you give that little heart and then it'll like turn red, right? And then what would happen is I would leave the subway and I would be like, hey, that was a funny tweet I saw earlier. Let me go to my liked tweets to find it. And it wouldn't be there. And that's because Twitter uses optimistic rendering for their favorites. What they do is they like, when you click favorites, even if it doesn't come through, even if it didn't like work because I didn't communicate in the underground, I want you to turn that heart pink because liking doesn't really matter to us. And it's like going to be weird if like, if a user fails to like something, you don't want them to like get an alert and error being like, whoa, you failed to like this because your network connection is bad. Go find a better network connection. That would stress me out. And like, the only reason I read Twitter is because it's marginally better than doing nothing. And if you get like a pop-up, that would like totally kill the vibe. So what it instead does is regardless of whether you've actually liked it or not, it's going to pretend you liked it so that you feel like you liked it. But when you tweet or something like that, it actually goes ahead and it doesn't post the tweet until after it gets a response back from the server. In fact, like it'll like actually show a really gray tweet that's still like loading and like it's going to be fluctuating. This is called pessimistic rendering, where you go ahead and you say, hey, I'm going to wait for the server to send back a response to render that something happened. In most cases, you're probably going to use pessimistic rendering. In some cases where it truly doesn't matter to you whether the user actually succeeded or not, or it probably won't matter to the user at all either, you can go ahead and use optimistic rendering to make sure that you don't have to like error handle every little thing. Does that make sense? We did a lot here. You're now full stack developers. So congratulations. And toast to it or whatever. This is a long way to go. You are now in a place where as soon as you do this yourself, as soon as you make a fetch request to your own Rails app, you're going to be like, you should first off like do a little celebratory dance, give each other high fives via the internet, whatever. Congratulations on getting this far. And yeah, we're going to be doing this for the rest of the program. Cool. All right, I'm going to let you go. Hit me up if you have any questions. Peace.